Your position has been reclassified as non-essential support staff. That's what Trevor Hastings told me during my performance review on a Wednesday morning, sitting across his oversized desk with the confidence of someone who just invented a new way to say, "You're not important," without technically saying it. Non-essential support staff. I'd been import compliance manager at Global Trade Solutions for 6 years, managing regulatory documentation for international shipments worth approximately $200 million annually, ensuring every customs form was accurate and every classification code was correct so that million-dollar cargo didn't get stuck at ports costing the company thousands in demurrage fees. But according to Trevor, our new VP of Operations who'd been hired 8 months ago from a consulting firm where he'd mainly made PowerPoint presentations about supply chain optimization, my work was non-essential support that could be handled by junior staff with basic training and some automated software he'd found at a trade show. He actually had a slide showing my position being moved from critical operations to administrative support in the new organizational structure, complete with arrows and boxes suggesting this change would improve efficiency metrics by 23%, a number he'd apparently calculated by dividing my salary by the cost of the software subscription and junior staff compensation. I'm Drew Sullivan, and I sat in that performance review at Global Trade Solutions watching Trevor explain how my role was being restructured to align with operational efficiency objectives, while he clicked through slides showing cost savings projections that assumed customs compliance was basically data entry rather than specialized regulatory knowledge. 6 years, 2 months, and 19 days of ensuring that international shipments cleared customs without violations, fines, or delays. And Trevor had decided that compliance work was paperwork that any entry-level employee could handle with a software subscription and a weekend training session. I wasn't the executive who negotiated contracts or made strategic decisions about market expansion. I drove an 11-year-old Ford Escape with 184,000 miles on it and a collection of international shipping regulation manuals in the back seat because I studied them during lunch breaks when most people were scrolling through social media. I lived in a modest apartment with a desk covered in customs tariff schedules, classification guides, and regulatory updates from multiple countries because international trade law changes constantly and staying current requires actual effort rather than assuming software can handle everything. My bookshelf contained 3-ring binders organized by country with the latest customs regulations, export control lists, and trade agreement provisions that I'd annotated with notes about how they applied to global trade-specific clients and products. I was technical, detail-oriented, methodical about documentation, and apparently non-essential to a VP who thought customs compliance was about filling out forms rather than understanding the complex regulations that determine whether cargo moves smoothly or gets detained, costing clients millions in delays. The trouble had started 8 months ago when Global Trade hired Trevor to modernize operations and improve efficiency metrics. Trevor came from a management consulting background at a firm called Strategic Operations Partners where he'd spent 5 years advising companies on process optimization without actually having to implement anything or deal with consequences when the optimizations failed. He had that consultant energy, expensive suits that he'd mentioned the brand names of in casual conversation, buzzword vocabulary pulled from business school case studies, and complete certainty that any process could be improved by eliminating expensive personnel and replacing them with cheaper alternatives and software automation. His LinkedIn profile was full of posts about operational excellence, lean management, and disrupting traditional workflows, all written with the confidence of someone who'd never actually had to make any of his recommendations work in reality. His first move was conducting an operational assessment, where he spent 3 weeks interviewing employees, observing workflows, and generating a 47-slide presentation categorizing every position as either revenue-generating essential or administrative support based primarily on whether the role directly closed deals or brought in new clients. Sales positions, revenue-generating essential. Business development, revenue-generating essential. Marketing, revenue-generating essential. Import compliance, administrative support. The fact that import compliance prevented revenue-generating shipments from being delayed or rejected at customs, thereby protecting the actual revenue that sales had generated, apparently wasn't relevant to his categorization system. In Trevor's framework, if you weren't directly talking to clients or closing deals, you were overhead that needed to be optimized. His second move was announcing that all administrative support positions would be evaluated for automation opportunities and potential headcount reduction to improve operational leverage and reduce fixed costs. He'd attended a logistics trade show in Las Vegas and discovered software called Customs EZ that promised to automate customs documentation and compliance verification. The software had impressive demo videos showing how easy it was to generate customs forms by inputting basic shipment information and letting the system handle classification codes, duty calculations, and regulatory requirements. The demo showed a user typing in industrial machinery, and the software automatically generating a complete set of customs documents with harmonized codes, duty calculations, and country-specific forms. It looked magical, foolproof, and most importantly to Trevor, it cost $3,600 annually per user compared to my $87,000 salary. What Trevor didn't understand, and what no demo video could explain, was that customs compliance isn't about generating forms. It's about understanding harmonized tariff schedule classifications at the 8-digit subheading level, where a difference of 1 digit can mean a 15% duty rate instead of 2.5%. It's about knowing which regulatory agencies have jurisdiction over specific products: FDA for food and drugs, EPA for chemicals, DOT for hazardous materials, Department of Commerce for controlled technology. It's about tracking changes in trade agreements that affect duty rates, USMCA provisions for automotive parts, EU preferential treatment for certain agricultural products, GSP benefits for developing countries that expire and renew on different schedules. It's about understanding country-specific documentation requirements, China's CCC marking for certain electronics, Saudi Arabia's SABRE certification for consumer goods, Brazil's import licensing for machinery. And most critically, it's about knowing when something in a shipment description might trigger regulatory scrutiny that requires additional documentation or classification justification. Customs EZ could generate forms based on standardized inputs. What it couldn't do was recognize that precision grinding equipment might include CNC capabilities that triggered export control requirements, or that industrial chemicals might contain compounds requiring environmental permits in the destination country, or that medical devices might need CE marking certificates for EU entry. Those recognitions required someone who understood both the products and the regulations, who'd spent years learning what triggers additional scrutiny and what documentation prevents delays. On February 3, Trevor presented his operational efficiency plan to the executive team. I wasn't invited to the presentation, but I heard about it immediately afterward from Patricia Wong, our CFO, who'd been skeptical of Trevor's approach from the beginning. According to Patricia, Trevor's plan projected $340,000 in annual savings by streamlining compliance operations through automation and personnel optimization. Translation: eliminate my position, hire a junior coordinator at $38,000 to input shipment data into Customs EZ, and assume the software would handle everything else. Patricia had asked pointed questions during the presentation. What happens when Customs detains a shipment because the software misclassified something? Who resolves complex regulatory issues that require expertise beyond form generation? What's the cost of cargo delays if the automation fails? Trevor's answers had been dismissive. The software vendor guaranteed accuracy, customs issues would be rare exceptions, and the cost savings justified the minimal risk of occasional delays. On March 12, 3 weeks after the executive presentation and during my performance review, Trevor announced that Global Trade was implementing his plan. My position was being reclassified from Import Compliance Manager to Administrative Support Coordinator. My responsibilities would be transitioned to a junior operations coordinator named Kevin Shen, who would use Customs EZ to generate customs documentation. I would be reassigned to general administrative support duties including filing, data entry, scanning documents, maintaining office supply inventory, and assisting with scheduling and meeting coordination. My salary would be reduced by 28% from $87,000 to $62,640 to reflect the adjusted scope of responsibilities. Trevor presented this as a positive restructuring that would allow me to broaden my skill set and contribute to operational excellence in new ways. He even suggested it was an opportunity for professional development, as if transitioning from specialized regulatory expert to general office assistant was a career advancement rather than a demotion designed to make me quit. I could have quit. Should have quit. My resume was strong and import compliance managers were in demand. But I made a different decision. I'd built 6 years of institutional knowledge about Global Trade's clients, their products, the specific customs challenges they faced, and the regulatory requirements for their international shipments across 47 different countries. Trevor thought that knowledge was non-essential and could be replaced by software and a junior coordinator with basic training. I decided to let him learn exactly how essential that knowledge was through direct experience with the natural consequences of his decisions. Now about 74% of you think I'm about to sabotage something, and you're wrong. Subscribe right now. Because what happens when you replace customs expertise with software and junior staff is educational without requiring any sabotage, just natural consequences of ignorance meeting regulation, and those consequences are spectacular enough without any help from me. On March 19th, my transition officially began. Kevin Chen, the junior operations coordinator who'd been with Global Trade for 7 months and whose previous experience was 3 years in retail logistics at a regional distribution center, started using Customs EZ to generate customs documentation for international shipments. Kevin was smart, eager to learn, and completely unprepared for the complexity of international trade compliance. His training consisted of 2 days watching tutorial videos from the Customs EZ vendor, a 4-hour session with Trevor covering best practices for efficient form generation, and access to the software's help documentation. He was explicitly told not to consult with me about shipment details because that would undermine the new automated process and create dependency on legacy knowledge. I was reassigned to administrative support, given a cubicle on the opposite side of the office from operations, and handed a list of filing projects, supply inventory tasks, and meeting coordination responsibilities. Trevor made it clear I was not to review or correct Kevin's customs work because doing so would interfere with the operational efficiency metrics he was tracking. The first shipment Kevin processed was straightforward, manufacturing equipment going to Canada under USMCA. The equipment was standard industrial machinery with clear tariff classifications, well-documented specifications, and no special regulatory requirements. Kevin entered the basic information into Customs EZ, which generated a commercial invoice, packing list, USMCA certificate of origin, and Canadian customs declaration. Everything looked fine. The shipment left on March 22nd and cleared Canadian customs on March 24th without issues. Trevor sent a congratulatory email to the operations team on March 25th highlighting the successful transition to automated compliance and noting that the shipment had cleared seamlessly without requiring expensive specialized expertise. He attached a slide showing projected annual savings and referenced this as validation of his operational efficiency initiative. The second shipment was more complex, industrial chemicals going to Mexico. The chemicals included 3 different compounds used in manufacturing processes, a paint additive, a cleaning solvent, and a polymer catalyst. These chemicals had specific regulatory requirements under USMCA trade agreements that gave preferential duty treatment if certain origin and content criteria were met. They also had Mexican environmental regulations requiring additional documentation for certain hazardous material classifications. Kevin entered industrial chemicals for manufacturing into Customs EZ. The software classified them using general chemical harmonized tariff schedule codes based on the broad product category. It generated duty calculations using standard rates without checking whether the specific chemical compounds qualified for preferential USMCA treatment that would reduce duties by 6.5%. It didn't flag that one of the solvents was classified as hazardous material under Mexican environmental regulations requiring additional permits and documentation. The shipment left Los Angeles on March 28 on a truck heading to Monterrey, Mexico. On March 30th, the shipment was detained at the Nuevo Laredo border crossing. Mexican customs identified that the chemical classifications on the import documents didn't match the actual chemical compound specifications on the product safety data sheets. They also noted that one compound required environmental documentation that wasn't included in the shipment paperwork. Kevin received notification that the shipment was detained and needed additional documentation. He spent 4 hours trying to understand what documentation was required, calling the Mexican customs broker who explained in technical terms that Kevin didn't fully understand. He eventually called the client to request updated safety data sheets and environmental permits. The client had the documentation but hadn't provided it initially because normally I would have requested it based on knowing that those specific chemicals required additional permits. The shipment was detained for 4 days while documentation was gathered and submitted. Total cost, $8,000 in demurrage fees for the truck waiting at the border, plus $3,200 that Global Trade had to credit to the client for the duty overpayment that resulted from not claiming USMCA preferential treatment. Kevin didn't fully understand what went wrong because Customs EZ had generated all the required forms. The software just didn't know about the preferential trade agreement provisions or the specific environmental regulations that I would have flagged based on recognizing the chemical compounds from their CAS numbers. Trevor attributed the detention to normal customs variability, and sent Kevin a note saying these occasional issues were expected and not concerning as long as they remained rare exceptions. The third shipment was problematic: medical devices going to the European Union. The devices included diagnostic imaging equipment, patient monitoring systems, and surgical instruments. Medical devices have specific regulatory classification requirements in the European Union under the Medical Device Regulation, and certain classifications require CE marking certificates, technical documentation files, and additional permits proving regulatory compliance with EU safety standards. Kevin entered medical equipment into Customs EZ. The software classified the devices using general medical instrument codes without verifying the specific regulatory classifications under EU medical device regulations. It didn't check whether the equipment required CE marking documentation or whether the devices were Class 1, low risk, less documentation, or Class IIA/IIB, moderate risk, extensive documentation required. The shipment left on April 8 heading to Hamburg, Germany. On April 12, the shipment arrived at Hamburg port and was presented to German customs. Customs review identified that several devices in the shipment were Class IIA medical devices requiring CE certification documentation that wasn't included in the import paperwork. The commercial invoice also didn't properly identify the devices according to EU medical device classification codes. The shipment was detained pending documentation review. The client had to hire a German customs broker to sort out the classification issues and provide missing documentation. The process required going back to the manufacturer to obtain CE certificates and technical files that proved EU compliance. Total cost: $12,000 in German customs broker fees, $6,500 in demurrage charges for container storage at Hamburg port, and 3 weeks of delay before the shipment finally cleared on May 2. Kevin called me at my administrative support desk to ask if I knew anything about EU medical device regulations. I told him I'd previously handled similar shipments and could explain the requirements, but that he should check with Trevor first since I'd been instructed not to interfere with the new automated process. Kevin eventually figured it out through painful trial and error and with expensive help from the German customs broker. I watched these problems develop from my administrative support position. I filed documents, restocked office supplies, and organized meeting schedules while Kevin struggled with customs issues that I could have prevented with 10 minutes of review. Trevor and Kevin thought the delays were unfortunate exceptions, random customs issues that occasionally happen in international trade. They didn't understand that both delays were directly caused by incorrect classification and missing documentation that I would have identified before the shipments left the warehouse. Patricia Wong, the CFO, started asking questions. She'd noticed the customs delay costs on the monthly financial reports and wanted to understand why demurrage fees and customs broker charges had increased since the compliance optimization implementation. Trevor assured her these were temporary adjustment issues while Kevin learned the system and that costs would normalize. On April 15, the big shipment happened. Global Trade's largest client, Precision Manufacturing, was sending $12 million worth of specialized industrial equipment to China. The equipment included CNC machining centers with 5-axis simultaneous control capabilities, automated assembly systems with advanced robotics, and precision measurement systems with laser scanning technology. This was the most valuable single shipment Global Trade had handled in 3 years, and it was critical to Precision's expansion into Chinese manufacturing. They had a new facility in Shanghai that was waiting for this equipment to begin production operations. Kevin used Customs EZ to generate the customs documentation. He entered industrial machinery and equipment based on the product descriptions in Precision's purchase order. The software classified the equipment using standard machinery codes based on the general product categories. It generated a commercial invoice showing the $12 million value, packing lists describing the equipment in general terms, and Chinese customs declaration forms using the standard tariff codes. Kevin submitted the documentation to Chinese customs along with the shipping manifest. Everything looked complete from a form generation perspective. Customs ZZ had produced all the required documents with no error messages or warnings. Kevin forwarded the documentation to Precision and marked the shipment as cleared for export. The shipment left Los Angeles on April 18 on a container ship heading for Shanghai. Transit time was approximately 2 weeks with expected arrival April 30. The cargo was scheduled to clear Chinese customs on May 3 and be delivered to Precision Manufacturing's facility on May 5. Precision had production schedules, employee training programs, and client commitments all dependent on this equipment arriving on time. Any delay would cascade through their operations, causing significant disruption and cost. On May 2, while the ship was approaching Shanghai port, Kevin received notification from Chinese customs that the shipment had been flagged for detailed inspection and verification of classification codes and export licensing requirements. The notification stated that certain categories of industrial equipment with advanced technological capabilities require export licenses from U.S. authorities when being shipped to China due to technology transfer restrictions under Export Administration regulations. Kevin read the notification 3 times trying to understand what it meant. Export Administration regulations. Export licenses. Technology transfer restrictions. These were terms he'd never encountered in his 7 months at Global Trade or his previous retail logistics experience. He searched the Customs ZZ help documentation for export licenses, and found general information about export regulations but nothing specific about how to determine whether equipment required licenses. He called the Chinese customs broker who explained that the CNC machining centers and precision measurement systems in the shipment had technical specifications that potentially triggered export control requirements under U.S. regulations. The broker asked if Global Trade had obtained export licenses from the Bureau of Industry and Security before shipping. Kevin didn't know what the Bureau of Industry and Security was. He called Precision Manufacturing and asked if they had export licenses for the equipment. Precision's logistics manager told him that customs compliance was Global Trade's responsibility and they'd assumed all necessary export documentation was handled. On May 3, Chinese customs formally detained the shipment pending provision of valid export licenses or technical documentation proving the equipment didn't require licenses. The notification stated that without proper documentation, the $12 million shipment would remain detained at Shanghai port, accumulating demurrage fees at approximately $2,000 per day. Kevin escalated to Trevor. Trevor escalated to Patricia. Patricia called an emergency meeting on May 4. Present were Trevor, Kevin, myself, Precision Manufacturing's logistics director and legal counsel, and Global Trade's outside legal counsel who specialized in trade compliance. Trevor looked like someone who just discovered that cutting costs sometimes costs exponentially more. Patricia looked like someone doing mental calculations about how much this disaster would impact quarterly financials. Kevin looked like someone who just realized that occasional customs issues could involve millions of dollars and federal regulations. Drew, Kevin is having difficulty resolving the China customs situation, Patricia said directly. We need your expertise to determine what documentation is required and how to resolve this detention. I pulled up the shipment details on my laptop. I reviewed Precision's equipment specifications, cross-referenced them against Export Administration regulations control lists, and immediately identified the problem. This equipment requires Export Administration regulations licensing, I said. The CNC machining centers have 5-axis simultaneous control capabilities with positioning accuracy and resolution that exceed the technical parameter threshold specified in Export Control Classification number 2B001 on the Commerce Control List. These systems are controlled items for export to China. You need licenses from the Bureau of Industry and Security at the Department of Commerce before you can legally export them. Can we get licenses now? Trevor asked. Standard licensing timeline is 60 to 90 days from application submission to approval decision. The equipment is already in Shanghai. You've shipped controlled technology to China without required export licenses. That's a violation of federal export control law under the Export Administration Act. Trevor's face went through several colors in rapid succession, settling on a shade that suggested his blood pressure had reached concerning levels. How did this happen? The software approved the classification. Kevin followed the process. Customs EZ doesn't check equipment technical specifications against Export Administration Regulations control lists. It does basic harmonized tariff schedule classification for customs duty calculation purposes. Export control review requires understanding the technology capabilities and manually checking technical parameters against detailed regulatory criteria in the Commerce Control List. That's specialized knowledge. That's what I used to do before you reclassified me as non-essential administrative support. Precision's legal counsel spoke up. If global trade shipped our equipment in violation of export control regulations, we need to understand the legal exposure and remediation options immediately. Global Trade's legal counsel answered. Violations of export administration regulations can result in civil penalties up to $300,000 per violation or twice the transaction value, whichever is greater. In this case, twice the transaction value would be $24 million. Criminal penalties for willful violations include fines up to $1 million and imprisonment up to 20 years, though criminal prosecution typically requires evidence of intentional violation rather than negligence. The room got very quiet. Trevor looked like he was calculating whether his operational efficiency savings of $340,000 annually justified creating a $24 million regulatory exposure. What are our options for resolving this? Patricia asked me directly. Option 1, apply for retroactive export licenses, though BIS rarely approves licenses after equipment has already been shipped without authorization. Option 2, work with Precision and BIS to conduct detailed technical analysis documenting that the equipment actually doesn't meet the technical parameter thresholds for control, if that analysis supports that conclusion. Option 3, re-export the equipment back to the U.S., which would require Chinese customs approval and would cost hundreds of thousands in shipping and storage fees. Option 4, seek voluntary self-disclosure to BIS explaining the violation and requesting favorable penalty consideration, which might reduce penalties but doesn't eliminate them. None of these options are good. Best case scenario is several months of delay, tens of thousands in legal and consulting fees, and possible reduced penalties. Worst case is substantial fines, permanent detention of the equipment, and criminal investigation. Precision's logistics director added. Our production schedules depend on this equipment being operational by May 15th. Every day of delay costs us approximately $50,000 in lost production capacity and penalties from our customers for delayed deliveries. If this takes months to resolve, we're looking at millions in operational losses. And if global trade caused this through compliance violations, we'll be seeking full compensation for damages. Trevor looked at me with an expression somewhere between desperation and realization. Drew, can you resolve this situation? I can consult with BIS regulators, Chinese customs officials, and technical experts to determine the best resolution path and work through whichever option has the highest probability of success. But I'm currently classified as non-essential administrative support at 28% reduced salary. If you want me to resolve a $12 million customs crisis involving potential federal violations and multi-million-dollar penalty exposure, we need to discuss appropriate compensation reflecting the value of my expertise. Patricia didn't hesitate. Drew will be transferred back to Import Compliance Manager effective immediately with full salary restoration. We'll also discuss appropriate additional compensation for resolving this situation. Trevor started to object, but Patricia cut him off with a look that suggested his operational efficiency initiatives were no longer her priority. That afternoon, I was officially reinstated as Import Compliance Manager. My salary was restored to $87,000 plus a 22% increase to $106,140 to reflect expanded responsibilities and critical expertise recognition. I was also given a crisis resolution bonus of $35,000 payable upon successful resolution of the China customs situation. I spent the next 6 weeks working with BIS regulators, Chinese customs officials, Precision's technical team, and independent export control consultants to conduct detailed analysis of the equipment specifications. We documented that while the CNC systems were sophisticated and close to control thresholds, certain technical parameters including positioning accuracy and resolution fell just slightly below the specific numerical thresholds that triggered export control classification number 2B001 controls. This required extensive technical measurement, third-party verification, and detailed documentation proving the specifications. The analysis cost $67,000 in consulting fees. The legal work cost another $28,000. And the shipment sat at Shanghai port for 42 days, accumulating demurrage fees of $84,000 before Chinese customs accepted the technical documentation and released the cargo on June 14. Total costs to global trade and precision manufacturing: $179,000 in direct fees and demurrage charges, $2.3 million in lost production costs for Precision's facility during the delays, and a $180,000 settlement payment that global trade made to Precision for the compliance failure that caused the detention. Trevor Hastings was terminated on July 2. The official reason given to staff was strategic differences about operational priorities, but everyone in the company knew it was because his automation initiative had created a $12 million customs crisis that cost the company its largest client plus hundreds of thousands in remediation costs. Patricia had presented the financial impact to the board, and they'd made the decision quickly. Kevin was reassigned back to General Operations Coordination, handling domestic logistics. Customs ZZ was discontinued, and Global Trade returned to human expert-based compliance review. And I was promoted to Director of Trade Compliance with expanded authority over all international shipment documentation, regulatory interpretation, and explicit veto power over any operational changes affecting customs compliance processes. 6 months after being called non-essential support staff, I was earning 48% more than my previous salary, had formal authority to prevent future automation disasters, and had a retention agreement protecting my position from executive operational efficiency initiatives. 1 year after the crisis, I ran into Trevor at a logistics industry conference in Chicago. He was working as an independent consultant, handing out business cards describing his expertise in supply chain optimization and operational excellence, which meant he was between full-time positions after the global trade disaster had become reasonably well known in the industry. "Drew, I heard you're doing well at Global Trade. Director of Trade Compliance, impressive title. The role reflects the actual value of customs compliance expertise, which turned out to be considerably more essential than your operational assessment indicated. That China situation was unfortunate. The software didn't meet the export control requirements. The software couldn't catch them. Export control compliance requires understanding technology specifications and regulatory criteria. That's human expertise built over years of studying regulations and learning how they apply to real products. You reclassified me as non-essential support staff because you thought compliance was paperwork that software could automate. Then a $12 million shipment got detained at Chinese customs because nobody understood export control regulations, and suddenly my expertise became essential again. I was trying to improve operational efficiency. The cost savings analysis supported the automation approach. Your cost savings analysis didn't account for the cost of regulatory violations because you didn't understand customs compliance well enough to know those costs existed. You saved $87,000 in my salary and spent $359,000 fixing the problems that resulted from eliminating my expertise. That's not operational efficiency. That's expensive ignorance. The lesson isn't about revenge through withholding help or enjoying watching disasters unfold. It's about understanding that some expertise can't be automated regardless of how impressive the software demos look, that regulatory compliance requires knowledge built over years of learning how rules apply to specific situations, and that executives who dismiss experienced people as non-essential learn expensive lessons when regulations enforce themselves through detained shipments and potential federal violations. Trevor thought cutting my salary and replacing me with junior staff and software would improve efficiency metrics and generate cost savings that would look good on quarterly reports. What actually happened was that the absence of real expertise created a cascade of compliance failures culminating in a customs crisis that cost far more than my salary ever had and nearly resulted in multi-million-dollar regulatory penalties. Thanks for staying through this entire story, everyone who understands that some jobs look like simple paperwork to people who don't understand the expertise required to do them correctly. If this resonated with you, if you've ever been dismissed as non-essential or had your specialized knowledge undervalued by people who thought software could replace experience, subscribe and share your story. These workplace tales remind us that expertise has value, that some knowledge can't be automated, and that the cost of eliminating essential people often exceeds the savings by orders of magnitude. Your expertise doesn't disappear when someone reclassifies you as support staff or replaces you with automation. The regulations don't care about organizational charts or efficiency metrics, and sometimes the most essential people are the ones preventing disasters that executives don't know enough to fear until those disasters actually happen and cost millions to resolve.